You need something permanent like Americans for Prosperity that can fight these issues. I mean, we talk about school choice, free market reforms in education. That's been an idea that's been, people have been fighting on that for 70 years. And it wasn't ripe. It wasn't ready 25 years ago, but it is ready today. And we've seen ESA, ESA program after ESA program in the states. But you also talked about the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. That was President Trump's tax cuts, and Americans for Prosperity worked with the Trump administration to get those through. Those need to be reauthorized in next Congress, and if they aren't, they go away, and gigantic tax increases on the American people. This is long-term work that's being done, and it's good to it's essential to have that long-term capability and infrastructure there to do that, right?
Americans are capable of achieving extraordinary things when they have the freedom and opportunity to do so. This is American Potential. And here's your host, Jeff Crank.
Well, thanks for being with us for another episode of American Potential. This week, Americans for Prosperity is officially celebrating its 20th anniversary, which is hard to believe that it's been 2 decades since AFP first started fighting for limited government and for freedom. Now, from the grassroots level to Congress, AFP's empowered Americans to stand up against big government overreach, advocating instead for policies that create freedom and opportunity for individuals to pursue their version of the American dream. Now, this milestone isn't just about the accomplishments of AFP, but it's about the hard work of Americans who've taken action to remove government-imposed barriers. From small business owners getting burdensome regulations removed, to parents wanting more educational options for their children, these are the people who are making a difference. These changes couldn't have been made without the start of the first state chapter of Americans for Prosperity. And we've had AFP's first state director, Alan Cobb, on the podcast to talk about how AFP got its start by stopping a tax increase in Kansas. We have Derek Sontag and Annie Patnaud, 2 of the longest employed employees of AFP, on the podcast to talk about the early days. Now, today, we're going to talk to another longtime employee of AFP, Brent Gardner, who is the Chief Government Affairs Officer. Brent, thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Jeff. Glad to be here.
So you've been around before AFP. You were around for, politics and Washington and things like that for a long time. How did you first hear about AFP?
Well, actually, it's kind of a funny story. I'm a beer bottle opener. When I was in college, I got a pack as a college Republican chair that included stress balls and bottle cap openers. And while I used the bottle cap openers more during my college years, the stress ball sure would have come in handy in my time working in government affairs ever since.
Yeah, I bet. So you don't still have the bottle opener, do you?
You know what? I don't, but I do have some stuff from that era. I have a baseball from that era, and I've got some battle scars from some of the fights that we fought with AFP along the way before.
Do you remember when you first heard of Americans for Prosperity? Like, what was your thought about them and the organization?
Man, when I first found out about them, AFP was young. AFP had just been born, basically, and I was a college kid who was politically active, and I wanted to do some things. And one of the great things about AFP is that people were reaching out to folks and getting them something to do that was real. And so some of my first experiences I remember it was a place where I came to learn a lot about issues I cared about and to get actively engaged. And, even though AFP was in its infancy, it was in the right fights at the right time. So even though I didn't know I wanted to do more with AFP kept being in the places engaged in the fights that I wanted to be in. So we kept crossing paths. The more I did in politics, the more I got to know about AFP until, years later when I had the opportunity to join.
Yeah. I mean, let's talk a little bit about how AFP's, it's different. I mean, it's a different model and a different approach, right? Washington is filled with lobbyists, all across the city. You can't shake a stick without hitting a couple of them. But
That's right.
Why is AFP different in the way that they advocate and do their business?
Yeah, no, look, I think there's a lot of great folks doing good work in Washington, and I think folks that aren't as well. But I think it's what AFP represents. And really, from top to bottom, we're a grassroots organization. When we're lobbying, when we're working with members of Congress, it's not about how great a lobbyist we are, but it's the folks that we represent. People know AFP, not because of the brand, not because of what we stand for, but because back home, there's folks in their community. There's people that knock on doors. They know the local organizers. They know what we stand for. They've been in fights with us, and sometimes they've been in fights against us. And I think that's really the best part about it. It's the level of authenticity that comes from knowing that the people that stand behind this are folks that are out there working on it every day. And it's a market differentiator for AFP. And for those folks who participate in AFP activities, they know that if they invest their time, talent, and treasure in this to engage today, this is an organization that's poised to make a difference for a really long time. So I think it just sets us apart.
Well, the thing I've always loved about AFP, and it's why I found a home 15 years ago when I first started at AFP, is because it's the principle, right, that it exudes. So we've held throughout all the 15 years that I've worked for the network or for AFP, we focused on principle. And sometimes that brought us at odds with Republicans, many times with Democrats. But it's the principle of standing up for freedom, liberty, for limited government, those sorts of things. And you just don't find that in a lot of places. A lot of lobbyists in town, they're for subsidies if it benefits their industry, but they're not for subsidies for their competitors. And I mean, AFP is just different that way. And that's why I love it and why I found my home there. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, I totally agree. I mean, I think the really nice thing about coming to work and volunteer your time for AFP is if you join because you believe something that AFP believes, that's not going to suddenly shift on you. The same can't be said really about any other part of politics. Elected officials who run on one thing come to Washington and do something different. Organizations that believe something for a really long period of time sometimes change based on the legislation or who's sponsoring it, or just the change in dynamics around where party politics are or whatever else. AFP, anchored to principle, I think it's a big difference. If you want to invest in it, if you want to be proud of the work that you do today, 10 years from now, you understand that it's tied to a principle and that it's the kind of thing that won't move. And it gives you, I think, a tremendous opportunity to feel comfortable investing in it. And then for years on after that, to be able to see what the downstream impacts are of passing good policy. I think that's something that makes us unique. And I think it's something that people understand too. The opportunity to figure out where AFP stands doesn't begin when we announce our position. If you follow AFP for any period of time, you can actually be pretty well positioned to predict where AFP is going to be. We have those principles: limited government, the opportunity to be able to move forward and having a focus on freedom. I mean, I think these are the types of things that, if you get to know what AFP is as a people, as the group of folks who are out there working for it, you pretty much know where we're going to stand. And then you can count on us standing for it.
Yeah. What made you decide to come work for AFP? You talked about how you first heard about them, but what made you make the decision, I want to go do that?
Yeah, no, I think it's like anything else. If you love what you do, you want to do it in the place where you can do it at the highest possible level. I mean, if you're playing basketball in the 90s, you want to play with Jordan on the Bulls. And I think when you look at the type of folks that AFP attracts, whether it's staff, whether it's the type of elected officials who work closely with AFP, or whether or not it's the volunteers and the people who are constantly out there doing the work, AFP is the organization who really, I think, just has their stuff together. As I pointed out, when I got to know AFP, I got to know them because they were in the foxhole if I was just getting to the fight, or if I'd been in the fight for a long time, I'd known them from the foxhole. And look, I think that's really critically important. If you really want to do the most that you can, you want to look for the biggest, best, and most effective platform that you can. And that's what made it so attractive. I've had a lot of great opportunities to work with excellent organizations that really, I think, have done a great job and made major impacts. But on the fights for today and the fight for the future of tomorrow, there's not a better organization to work with than AFP. And I can say that from experience. And I think that the vision that AFP has and the goals that we've set, ambitious as they may be, are the ones that are going to make a difference. And I want to be part of that fight.
Yeah. What was the very first issue that you worked on that you remember?
Farm bill, unfortunately. As I stepped into AFP, they say if you want to climb the hill, don't start at the steepest section. Well, we did, and that's the truth. We'll be fighting the farm bill for a long time. So many of the challenges that we face today are not linear. They're challenges of asymmetric and geometric warfare. And unfortunately, you look at the types of these long-standing spending institutional products like the Farm Bill, and it's essential for you to never take your foot off the gas on it. But the challenge to be able to make that incremental progress means you've got to be able to match long-term vision and resources to combat that fight. And it was my first step into the organization. And, I expect we'll still be fighting that for a long time. But it's, that type of cronyism and that type of government spending and that type of big government thought, that's just something that, it's going to be part of what we have to fight for a long time. But that was the first fight inside AFP.
Yeah. Talk about the Farm Bill just a little bit and some of the, this is a great example of principle in AFP. So why is AFP, what are some of the issues within the Farm Bill that AFP has fought on?
Yeah. Look, there's significant amounts of waste. Unfortunately, there's also the tying of multiple issues. There's a lot of subsidies that, are looked favorably on folks who oftentimes vote with us on other issues. But if you look at the unholy alliance that exists between programs like that and things like, nutritional funding and other social welfare programs, they're able to build a lot of folks who will take that vote because they're convinced that they can't take the opposite vote. I think one of the things that we've had to prove over the years is you can take a vote that's opposed to something as large and as institutional as the Farm Bill and ultimately do it based on principle. And your people are going to understand it. And organizations like AFP stand behind members who take the principle perspective and look for ways to reform these big programs. But things that have been around for a really long time, and look, Washington is really big on tradition, even if they're bad traditions, they're hard to fight. And it's tough to find organizations who look at a challenge at the size and scale of the Farm Bill and say, how do you take this on? Well, the answer is those are the big fights are the ones that are sometimes worth it. And you got to pick your shots and you got to find your opportunities. And I think that's one of the things that makes AFP unique is we have an ability to take that long-term fight to these types of issues, these types of challenges. But look, those types of challenges, things like that, things like our fight against the Export-Import Bank, they're going to be big challenges. They're going to be big, hairy challenges that you've got to go after. Some of them you're going to win. Some of them you're going to keep on fighting till you win. But the good news is if you're with AFP and you're in a principled perspective, you're always in a spot where you can make a difference every time the fight comes up.
What's been the hardest fight that you think you've ever been a part of?
Man, I'll tell you what, it's not a legislative issue. The hardest fight we've been part of is apathy. I think the hardest challenge that we have is to help connect people to how they can make a difference. And that's been true really in every one of the legislative fights that we've fought is how do you get someone to have an opportunity to understand how to utilize their voice? And I think a big part of that has been about getting people engaged wherever they're comfortable. There's a lot of different doors you can walk through to find a reason to engage in one of the issues AFP does. But getting those folks in the door to see that opportunity that's the biggest fight we have. Once folks are inside and they see what it is that they can do, they have a chance to take advantage of our trainings and our platforms and really join our community of like-minded folks who are out there working to achieve the same things they are, then the challenges may be big, but the opportunities are also big. And I think it gives folks a great opportunity. But look, if you want to talk about a legislative fight, spending and the size of government. Government is it's built to make itself bigger. That's its goal, to continue to survive. And the folks who rely on government to be the solution for their lives only see one vision of the future, and that's with more government. And so I think whether it's the question of a spending fight or whether it's the question of corporate cronyism and people who are lobbying the government for favor for their specific industries, those are always going to be the hardest fights, and we've got plenty of them. So, but I think the size and growth of government is one that's really challenging. But then I think ultimately just getting folks to take that first step, come out and try something, and just see how powerful one voice can be when you get together with other people willing to use their voice.
I've always looked at AFP as sort of that representative, the lobbyist, if you will, for the taxpayer, for the citizen, for the common person. doesn't have maybe somebody representing them in Washington, D.C. You look at it, AFP doesn't get a bunch of federal funding, sent their way or whatever. We're not after that. We're not about that. And so that's what makes it different, really, is it's connecting citizens to their government, but we're not out there with our hand out trying to get something from government other than to try and help save the country from fiscal calamity. Your thoughts on that paradigm?
Yeah, I mean, look, as someone who's a registered lobbyist, let me tell you this: the best voice for anyone isn't their registered lobbyist; it's their voice. And I have the privilege, and so do members of my team, of helping to elevate the voice of the grassroots who we represent. But at the end of the day, I do agree. I think the best voice that can represent somebody's perspective is their own. And to the extent where we can supercharge the voices of people trying to do great work, to the extent that, well, they're out there doing the great work of this country, working in states and counties across this country on different things, the ability to represent them when they're busy out there continuing to build their American dream is great for us. And it's great for the country. But the great thing about AFP, the best thing about AFP, is our ability to give people a pipeline to improve their use of their own voice and then amplify it. And I think that's a really big part of this. Look, there's tons of lobbyists out there who spend tens of millions of dollars trying to achieve things, and AFP beats them all the time, along with our volunteers and along with our staff. So at the end of the day, there's a lot of different strategies that you can engage to try and change the way things are. But AFP's got an impressive win record when it comes to getting citizens, consumers, constituents engaged, and going out there and changing this country for the better and preserving those things that make it great.
Well, it would go without saying that none of these stories that I'm about to ask you to tell should in any way shed me in a negative light. But what are some of your favorite AFP stories?
Oh, man. I'll tell you what, there's a bunch of them. I'll first just tell you, the number of times that you're up late working on a bill the night before it's coming onto the floor, working with elected officials, working with volunteers, sharing the stories of people who make that issue salient to a member. There's too many of them to pick just one. But look, I'll tell you some tough fights. Look, we've been in labor fights in Michigan that I'll never forget. Right to work in Missouri. Tough loss the first time through. Those were really big. I think the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act has to be one of the biggest ones. We hadn't seen effective tax reform in 30 years. And did the bill come out perfect? No. Would I have loved to see a whole lot more done? Yes. But you look at a piece of legislation that people have really worked on for years. There's been countless drafts. There have been attempts to try and do it. And, look, there were challenging constituencies out there who were advocating for their piece of the pie. The ability to get that over the finish line was a significant effort, helmed by so many. And to see the type of response that we did from elected officials and from voters and volunteers was incredible. The amount of effort that it took from a sustained perspective to get the right ideas to the front of the line. And then ultimately, even in the final days where trying to get one more thing could have, pushed the Jenga tower over, that was an incredible fight. But look, we've learned a lot from our losses too. I think ultimately, if you look at Obamacare repeal and replace, at the time, I can't imagine a time where maybe we had a bigger challenge that we were unable to meet. But what it's yielded coming out of that is a much better plan, I think, moving forward with the personal option that gives us a chance to address healthcare in a way that will fix the system and that ultimately people can sign on to and really get behind. So, I think that's another great thing about working for AFP. We have a chance to be able to make the big investment in what it's going to take to actually get us to where we need to be, not just incremental change. Those are some big ones, but the number of times that we've been not only here in DC, but in state capitals across the country, hearing from elected officials the power of AFP's support and opposition. There's too many stories to pick just one, Jeff, but there's a lot of good ones.
Yeah.
I could tell stories about you too. Your qualifier makes it a little bit harder. But
that qualifier was just a suggested qualifier. You can say anything you want, Brent.
No. I've seen you fish, so I know you've got some capabilities when it comes out there and going after what you want. So
yeah,
but no, lots of good stuff.
Yeah. Well, listen, and you talked about one of the things that struck me as you were giving that answer is, there's lots of people who think, well, this is just national stuff. It's just you work, it's AFP working with Congress or the administration, but it's not. I mean, AFP has chapters. We have a 50-state presence now. We don't have a chapter in all 50 states, but we have a 50-state strategy. And we are working in every single state in America. And some of the greatest victories we've had, I think, have been some of the state work that we've done. I think back to some of the days in Wisconsin and Governor Walker there, but also even at the local level. Some of these have been tremendous, tremendous battles, and they've made a tremendous difference, right?
I was going to say it's never been more salient for me than it is right now. I have a son who's 5-year-old and a daughter who's just about 4 months old. And so some of the work that I've seen that the teams have been able to work on at state capitals when it comes to education reform, it's something that when I was a younger person, I can tell you, I didn't look at it the same way. But just seeing what that is, what that impact means, for the future, when the future really comes into focus, for a new dad, newish dad like me, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah. And two great examples of this being long-term work, right? This couldn't be done by an organization that was around for a year or two and then went away. You need something permanent like Americans for Prosperity that can fight these issues. I mean, we talk about school choice, free market reforms in education. That's been an idea that's been, people have been fighting on that for 70 years. And it wasn't ripe. It wasn't ready 25 years ago, but it is ready today. And we've seen ESA, ESA program after ESA program in these states. But you also talked about the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. That was President Trump's tax cuts, and Americans for Prosperity worked with the Trump administration to get those through. Those need to be reauthorized in next Congress. And if they aren't, they go away, and gigantic tax increases on the American people. This is long-term work that's being done, and it's good to it's essential to have that long-term capability and infrastructure there to do that, right?
Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, listen, I got that lesson really early. In my first year, we had a lot of really great election success in 2014. And I'll never forget the next morning when I sat down with our then CEO and another group of their leadership. And the question was, what's next? That's been true every step of the way, whether it's a win or a loss at AFP. And it's about the type of over-the-horizon thinking, planning, preparation, and execution that really, in many cases, only AFP can do. I think from our perspective, we finish an ESA fight and we say, what's next? We see a challenging defeat like we saw at repeal and replace of Obamacare, and we said, what's next? That kind of roll up your sleeves behavior is pretty uncommon when it comes to politics, but it's not uncommon in the rest of America. And I think when you talk about business owners who make investments and bets and challenges that either work out or don't, they know to either double down or reflect and change the next step and then move forward. But AFP does take that business-like approach to it. They understand that you have to lay the right groundwork. You have to build the infrastructure. You need to educate the advocates. You need to activate the elected officials. And at the end of the day, if you take your foot off the gas for 1 second, it offers an opportunity for the opposition to be able to move in and send the country in a worse direction. And so my experience at AFP has been that that's always been the mentality. How do we plan for what's next, even while we're in a fever pitch battle for what we need to do now? And look, I think that makes the difference. This is always going to be a situation where you've got people with different perspectives, and you have to prepare as best you can to go out there and achieve what's right for this country. And I think AFP just does a marvelous job with it. And, our dedicated folks, whether it's on the staff or folks that work with us in the field in the States, that's the mentality. It's how do we always keep trying to make the American experiment ever better?
What's the, if you think back on all the battles, what's the one that you think meant the most to you to work on?
Man, I've brought it up before, but I think the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, it's pretty underrepresented, the impact that had on businesses, on entrepreneurs, on American families who, before that were held back by a system that was archaic, that didn't offer the type of international competitiveness that we needed, that that didn't necessarily reflect what we needed to do to help stimulate the economy by people being innovators and giving folks an opportunity to take their shot. And like I said before, I mean, look, there was more opportunity. And as you mentioned just a few minutes ago, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is got some stuff that's set to expire. We're going to revisit this come next year. We never turned it off. We had to be in a position where we were thinking about what came next, and we're going to have that discussion in 2025. But that one was really important. It was tough. Republicans and Democrats alike had to think through what they really cared about, and President Trump, I think, did a good job of trying to help drive an outcome that was going to help improve things for Americans. And a lot of people who really cared about some of the specific policy proposals that were out there in Congress, they went to battle on this stuff, and they found something that improved things for the American people. I mentioned a lot of late nights, a lot of early mornings too, a lot of bringing together folks from across this country to help share their stories, to go out there and advocate to their elected officials why it was important. And when something that people know needs to happen doesn't happen for 30 years, it's an achievement. It's a big opportunity. And we saw in the actuals, what it actually meant for this country. We saw new businesses emerge. We saw an economy improve. We saw a lot of really great things. And that was one that we felt from minute one to the last. But I'll add one more, Jeff, because that one's one that I think most people know about. But the Export-Import Bank of the United States is it's a subsidy. It's something that the world does, but that ultimately American taxpayers wound up on the hook for. It was a victory that everyone said couldn't be won. It was one that people had talked about for a long time, but it was considered to be something that was principle only. And a really dedicated group of folks got together. AFP was chief amongst them, and went out there and fought the fight. And while the Export-Import Bank came back, it was the first time the Export-Import Bank had to cease operations. It was the kind of thing where businesses had to go out and make it on their own. It wouldn't be something that was subsidized by taxpayers. And those types of victories showed people that things that they think can't be done can be. If you're really, truly dedicated and you put the type of effort in that you need to, the things that people say could never happen can happen. And I think that's the kind of thing that can give folks in tough challenges the type of inspiration to go on and recognize that things that others think are impossible are possible if you are willing to really put your shoulder into it.
Well, Ronald Reagan said that the definition of eternal life is a government program, and we're still trying to prove that isn't true. So all that work is great, and that's really what I think America has to do, and that's one of the things I think Americans for Prosperity is best at, is trying to force Congress, force an administration to come towards the realization that the federal government can't do all the things it's doing because we spend too much money, and we need to re-examine the size and scope of federal government and reorganize government so that we aren't doing all the things that we're doing right now. We can save some resources and save America by doing it.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah. So you've worked with grassroots in other organizations. What draws you to continue to work with grassroots?
It's the most rewarding way to work in this business. I mean, at the end of the day, government is supposed to be of the people, by the people, for the people, and far too often it forgets about that. The people are the folks that this whole thing is about. And when you see people who are willing to trade the time away from their family, from their own pursuits, to be able to go out there and try and make a difference and make this country what it really could be, folks who don't just hope for the promise, but go out there and work for it, that's the coolest thing there is. These are folks who are not persuaded by outside pressures to just let it go, let somebody else handle it. These are the folks that are the doers. They're the folks that have always led the way in putting America in a position to be the shining city on the hill. All the optimism that comes with really great lines is embodied and seen in a grassroots that is active, that is vibrant, that is engaged. And I think that's one of the best parts about working in this part of the business is, you can come to DC and it can feel a little bit insulated. It can feel like a bubble. And at times it can feel kind of gross and icky. There's good days too, but those things tend to kind of sneak into even the best parts of it. When you go across this country and see people who are willing to take that type of effort and make it their own, to be dedicated to it, to find a way to be able to make their own contribution, that's fuel. And that's the incredible fuel that fuels organizations It fuels movements, and it fuels people like me who also are out here trying to do this because we have things we want to achieve. We have goals for this country. And the grassroots are the folks who are the foot soldiers going out there to make it happen. And their energy is contagious. So it's a great thing to be able to work with them, to be able to feed off of their energy, to represent them when we have the opportunity, and then ultimately to share both victories and then be with them in moments where we know the work is still ahead of us. So that's what I love about working with the grassroots. It's the never-ending battery that's going to help drive the type of things that we need to see America be successful today and really into the future.
Well, Brent, I appreciate you joining us today and appreciate all you've done working for Americans for Prosperity. And I mean, you talked about some of the great things that we'd be able to look back on very proudly being a part of many of those battles. So thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Jeff. Really appreciate it.
All right, great. Well, listen, this is another great example of some of the great work that AFP does. And as it celebrates its 20-year anniversary, I hope that you will consider, if you haven't done so already, you'll consider getting involved and helping Americans for Prosperity with the great work that they do, whether it's at the national level, holding your members of Congress accountable, holding your U.S. senators accountable, holding the administration accountable for the decisions that they make. That's all important work. But even in your own state, Americans for Prosperity is doing great work there to bring freedom and liberty to your state, to expand opportunities for your kids, for your grandkids, for you personally in business and in education. And so I hope that you will take this moment to reach out and get connected to Americans for Prosperity in one of their state chapters. If you don't know how to do that, send me an email, jeff@americanpotential.com. I'll make sure that we get that over to your state director who oversees your state, and they'll get you engaged. And there's just be great work that's being done at the state legislative level as well as the local level all across America through Americans for Prosperity. Thanks for being with us. Thanks for defending liberty and freedom. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to American Potential. You may listen to more stories from Americans working every day to expand freedom and opportunity in their communities by visiting AmericanPotential.com.